Look. We all know the Jupiter Class Battlestar is itself a masterpiece of engineering. It is tough beyond reason, it can take a punch like a champ, and still deliver a good kicking to its enemies. The Galactica is but one of many Jupiter classes that served in the Cylon War, but through certain events found itself as the last. A hulk of a ship past its prime, leading humanity to its end. In the last video, we looked at what it is to live and serve aboard a Jupiter Class Battlestar during active service. And if you haven't seen that already, you probably should. Because today we're once again looking at life aboard the Galactica, but in very specific circumstances. We are, of course, talking about the Galactica and its final mission, and the struggles that many aboard may face. So strap in, get your algae protein bars at the ready, because let's see what it's like to live aboard the Galactica after the end of the worlds. Developed in direct response to the aggressive tactics of the Cylon Rebellion, Jupiter-class Battlestars were designed as versatile multi-role warships, setting a new benchmark in battlefield durability and combat effectiveness. With its signature reinforced multi-layered armour and advanced point defence systems tailored to counter the Cylon's long-range ordnance, the Jupiter-class became a lasting symbol of colonial might and resilience. With the conclusion of the Cylon War, the surviving Jupiter-class Battlestars were gradually dismantled and downgraded to support the construction of newer, more modern vessels. Caprica's Galactica, one of the last of her class, was reassigned to patrol duty before being decommissioned nearly 50 years after her launch. But rather than scrapping her, the fleet preserved Galactica as a living memorial, transforming her into an interactive museum. As part of this transformation, the Galactica's dual-plated armour would be stripped and repurposed, with the 24 gun batteries gradually removed, their munitions repurposed and recycled into the existing fleet. Same too with the Galactica's support vessels, with the onboard Viper and Raptor squadrons marked for redeployment across the colonial fleet.
I know this is not your problem, sir, but they want us to tear the mag accelerators and the launch tubes.
Well, the civilian ships can use them as autoloaders.
Sir, it's like we're tearing the old girl's heart out.
Following this was the closure of Galactica's starboard flight pod, sealing the landing deck and constructing an interactive museum, complete with scale miniatures and decommissioned starfighters, such as the Cylon War era Vipers and even the face of some old enemies.
At your command.
It is in this state that the Battlestar Galactica was reborn, in the fires of the 12 colonies. In a surprise attack that wiped out billions of human lives, a Cylon exploit shut down the defensive capabilities of the 12 colonies, shattering the colonial fleet and burning the colony worlds in nuclear fire. Indeed, the only reason the Galactica was spared the fate of her sister ships was due to the fact that it was so old, so backdated, that the compromised operating system, the Command Navigation Program, wasn't even present in the Galactica's systems. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for many of the Galactica's onboard fleet, notably the Mark VII Viper starfighters, that were all but wiped out in the events of the fall of the 12 colonies. These sleek ships were the latest in a long line of Viper starfighters that saw increased performance, firepower, and integrated avionics controlled by a central computer, removing much of the guesswork and spray and pray methods of earlier Viper models. Armed with 3 kinetic energy weapons with missile functionality, the Viper Mark VII was a serious contender in close-quarter starfighter combat that ensured colonial space superiority in any combat arena, including atmospheric flight. Well, when the power systems aren't remotely deactivated, leaving it absolutely useless in the face of an advanced and terrible enemy. Thankfully, as part of the Galactica's museum exhibit, 40 classic Mark II Vipers were on hand and ready to run with barely any maintenance, with their older avionic packages serving as the model for the replacements of the surviving Mark VIIs to enable them to once again be mobilised to counter the incoming Cylon threat. But I've spoken plenty on the old red and whites elsewhere. But regardless of the Galactica's good fortune in surviving the Cylon attack, without ammunition and fuel, it's little more than a floating lump of metal. But the Cylons weren't the only ones with a trick up their sleeve. Enter Ragnar Anchorage. Found in the upper atmosphere atmosphere of the gas giant Ragnar, the unmanned armory is likely a remnant from the first Cylon War. Protected by the background radiation that was known to directly disrupt Dreadus and Cylon systems, making it a perfect hideaway for colonial fleet forces in need of a location to regroup, refuel, and return to the battle without fear of Cylon pursuit. By docking with the station, the Battlestar Galactica was able to rearm and load up on both munitions and the raw materials for ammunition to be manufactured within the ship's own armories. Freshly armed with defensive and offensive ammunition, plus the inclusion of 5 nuclear warheads, the Galactica was finally ready to turn the tide and strike back against the fresh Cylon forces. At least, it was. With the arrival of the survivors of the 12 colonies came a new purpose for the Galactica. Standing as the guardian of humanity, the Galactica became the stone-faced beacon of hope for the 50,000 or so refugees on their quest for a new home, free from the dangers of the Cylons. As part of this role, the Galactica and her crew would take the lead on many of the logistical challenges involved in managing a ragtag fleet of refugees, using its fleet of support ships in aid of the delivery of supplies and personnel back and forth from each ship, cataloguing survivors and keeping the more dangerous refugees in check.
Something on the wireless. I think it's coming from the Daro Mazu.
None of us wants to die, but the fighting must end. If my sacrifice sends a signal to the Cylon that brings peace, then it was worth it. I do this for my children and for the children that will follow them. God's willing. Demand peace. Demand peace.
In exchange, supplies were distributed across the fleet in both directions, with the Galactica particularly depending on the supplies of Tilion. The source of fuel can be both mined and refined by ships within the fleet. But the main role of the Galactica became that of military escort. We'll look at this in more detail in a later chapter, but suffice to say that the Galactica became a serious contender on the galactic playing field. Even with its exterior plating stripped off, the Jupiter Class structure took some enormous hits through its journey. And while it continued to fight on, the damage sustained through enemy contact and repeated FTL jumps really began to take its toll.
I gotta warn you, it looks bad.
Frack me. How many are like this?
There's about a dozen bad spots. The length of the ship.
They go. This thing will slam shut like a book. How'd it get this bad?
Galactica was 50 years old when the war started. Put her through some things that would crush lesser ships.
Oh well, I'm sure it's not all that bad. Part of the longevity of the Jupiter class and its success during the Cylon War was its commander's determination to never feature networked computers, a defense against the cyber attack strategies of the Cylon aggressors. Even after the war, the Battlestar Galactica maintained a strict no-network policy, rejecting the corrupted command navigation program that opened the rest of humanity to attack during the fall of the 12 colonies. There are, of course, plenty of other systems on board the Galactica, just none that directly speak to each other, essentially leaving every computer in a form of quarantine while crew actively crunch numbers and move data from terminal to terminal. This extends to Viper and Raptor craft, which must use manual approach maneuvers when landing back on the Galactica's flight deck. One system that is vital to Galactic operations is the Dreadus system. Shorthand for direction, range and distance, the Dreadus operates as the Battlestar's early warning system. Despite it being a digital readout, it is in fact an analog instrument utilising EM radiation to create an echo of incoming space traffic. which is therefore invulnerable to external attack, though its radiation may be disrupted by the use of other, stronger forms of radiation. Same too with the Galactica's Navcon and FTL computers. While principally two separate systems, they are operated in tandem to ensure the crew are able to determine exactly where the Galactica is and where it will end up following a jump. Now, FTL jumps work using the event horizon technique, in which the ship's FTL engines will fold the fabric of space and choose which side of the paper to pop out on. The further the distance of the jump, the more intense the calculations. A good example of how this process works is to consider a jump of 5 light years away. Any observations made with a telescope will be 5 years out of date, so the crew must establish what motion the stars and stellar bodies will have made in those 5 years and determine where's safe to jump. 100 light years away, and suddenly you have a century of calculations to make. Throw in the odd rock-shaped variable and stellar drift, and the dangers present in making a random jump just gets worse and worse the further they go, until this margin of error grows past the so-called red line, theoretically the point of no safe return. Of course, when you're dealing with an apocalyptic event the likes of which no one has ever seen, you're gonna start taking some risks.
We gotta get out of here! Starboard! Jump the ship!
I don't have the rendezvous coordinates.
Doesn't matter! Just jump us out of here now! Jump!
Now, this is all well and good during ordinary wartime, where navigation can be operated under the guidance of a central colonial command, or else just stick to star charts and hard work. But with the Galactica taking on the additional burden of relaying this to over 60 civilian ships, including backup coordinates and emergency jump prep, and this starts to stretch the already hard-working crew as far as they can go. If anything were to go wrong, well, the Galactica can quickly find itself alone and adrift, and God knows where the rest of the human race might be.
Report. Report!
Dratus is empty, no contacts.
No contacts. Where's the fleet? D!
Checking all channels. No colonial signals. They're gone, sir.
In these extraordinarily rare circumstances, sometimes human processing power just isn't enough.
So, we jump back to the last coordinates, but we network the FTL computer with the nav, DC, and fire control computers. Once they're linked, we'll only need 10 minutes to complete the calculations.
You can't be serious. The old man would never do this, Colonel. No computer networks on his ship.
I acknowledge that, sir, but I can devise a software firewall that will buy us more time.
Really? You're gonna outthink the Cylons and computer software?
Sir, if we don't do this, we're never gonna find the fleet. Certainly not before the commander dies.
It just goes to show the power of a network computer system. It's impressive, but not without its dangers.
That was weeks ago. Why now?
Most likely, sir, it took that long for it to crack our encrypted passcodes. And once that happened, it started testing its ability to control our systems. Electrical, environmental.
How do you kill it?
Well, that's the tricky part. If it's a Cylon virus, it is extremely difficult to eradicate.
Unlike the colonial forces during the earlier Cylon War, however, there are more options following the fall of the 12 colonies. Cylon viruses are one thing, but should humanity find an ally within the Cylon ranks? Well, they may look pretty on the outside, but humanoid Cylons are a lot more complicated on the inside than perhaps we dare to think.
What the hell is she doing?
This.
The potential of this remains to be seen. Since the conclusion of the Cylon War, service within the colonial fleet really took on a more peacekeeping role within colonial space. Without the threat of Cylon aggression, colonial efforts turned towards smugglers and piracy, maintaining shipping routes and operating on a policy of area denial for those who work outside of colonial law. A case in point, the veteran Battlestars such as the Jupiter Class were relegated to individual sectors, barely needing to FTL jump beyond their moorings, let alone operate to maximum efficiency. In these peaceful times, Battlestar service was seen as a dead-end position, even with the introduction of more advanced modern Battlestars. If you would like to know more about the rank structure of a working Battlestar, please head on over to the Life Aboard a Jupiter Class Battlestar video, linked in the description below, as it's described in loads of detail over there. It's worth reiterating, however, that Battlestars by definition are less of a stand-up battleship and more a flight carrier for its onboard squadron of fighters and fighter support craft. The sum total of a Battlestar's flight complement is the Collective Air Group, named after its home Battlestar. Within this air group, squadrons are assembled by their ship type and role. So a squadron of Vipers will be assembled separately to a squadron of Raptors, each with squadron leaders and flight leaders reporting to an overall Commander Air Group, or CAG, who reports directly to the Battlestar's commanding officer. Ordinarily, the standard modus operandi for an air group is to control space around the Battlestar, pitching into organised mission profiles created by the ship's CAG where needed. These combat missions drew on the strengths of the Galactica's crew, with flight officers poring over recon images, studying for strengths and weaknesses before the senior officers assemble for a full briefing. With the commanding officer's approval, missions are executed with the full senior staff present. To respond to enemy actions in the moment, their messages relayed to the various areas of the ship by way of a bank of junior flight officers observing from the back of the room.
Mr. Gator, abort Strike 1.
Strike 1 Galactica, return to base. Repeat, abort your mission and return to base.
Galactica, Stubbs. Cylon Strike Force is turning away from Beacon and inbound Galactica.
In these unusual times, however, missions are anything but normal. With the dice loaded against them, the men and women of the Galactica must pull out every trick to avoid a straight fight. Redirection, sneak attacks, anything goes when facing a more powerful enemy. Hell, when it's a choice between victory and utter defeat, even the most ridiculous of strategies aren't off the table.
Altitude 99,000, falling like a rock. Launch. Launch them all. Stand by FTL.
Clear for launch.
Well, this ought to be different. You're clear. Stand by. Jump.
Frack me, that was cool. But let's dial it back a bit, because these sorts of missions are very few and far between. Day to day, pilots are only charged with one thing, and that's protecting the civilian fleet. Following the fall of the 12 colonies, serving aboard the Galactica became a grueling loop of repetition and exhaustion. With no end in sight, survival became a routine. Every crew member, from officers to deckhands, fell into the rhythm of relentless duty. Eat, work, fight, repair, repeat. Days would blur into nights, shifts would drag on, and sleep became a rare indulgence. The looming threat of Cylon pursuit meant no downtime, just the constant churn of barely keeping it all together. The ship was tired, the people are bored, even more so. But quitting was never an option. The survival of the human race depended on those showing up over and over again.
Yes, we're tired. Yes, there's no relief. Yes, the Cylons keep coming after us time after time after time. And yes, we are still expected to do our jobs.
For a Viper or Raptor pilot, the grind was brutal. The need for constant protection and vigilance over the fleet demanded a constant need for an active combat air patrol, known as a CAP. This defensive escort formation demanded at the very least a lead Viper and its support Viper, occasionally supported by a Raptor where needed. The purpose of this CAP is to serve as the eyes and ears of the Battlestar, able to react instantly to incoming Draedus contacts and respond in kind. While under active pursuit, this meant a constant rotation of launch, land, repeat. Pilots must endure high adrenaline and crushing fatigue in a loop of less than an hour. Pilots would learn quickly to sleep in their flight suits and live with the knowledge that the next scramble might be their last. When pushed to the limit, stimulants were on hand for pilots to keep them awake and on edge, though they weren't to everyone's taste.
Carry on.
Yes, sir.
Pilots to ready room, pre-flight briefing. Pilots to ready.
What?
Below decks, the enlisted crew kept the Galactica, and by extension her Vipers, alive through sheer grit. Every jump, every hit, every scuffed hull plate would push her closer to the edge. Without chance of dry dock or repair, every deckhand worth their salt were required to improvise to keep things running with spit, wire and prayer. The priority for every deckhand on board was to keep Vipers in the air. Something that was often easier said than done. Attrition was a huge problem and ships would be cannibalized for parts whenever a Viper was written off. Many enlisted crew would also often be on hand for repairs throughout the Galactica herself. And the unfortunate truth is that even these mechanics would need to face the realities of war, even this far back from the front line.
Never had a death on my hangar deck. Accidents. Never a death.
It's worth adding here that not every mission profile was one with active combat. Indeed, CAPs would often be redirected to investigate any incoming signal, and even a supposed friendly might turn out to be anything but.
Apollo, they're not responding.
Are you using the same channel?
Yeah, but suddenly nobody's home.
Starbuck, fire a burst across their bow.
Copy that.
Boomer, let Galactica know we have a problem out here.
Once bloated, slow and predictable, the freshly evolved Cylon Raiders opposite the Colonial Forces were incredibly dangerous. Fast, super maneuverable, and armed not only with their own kinetic energy weapons, but nuclear warheads and a suite of electronic warfare systems designed to shut down any modern military unit that should dare to put up a fight. It's no wonder then that the approach of a wing of Cylon Raiders is taken so incredibly seriously and must be dealt with immediately by the CAP, or else alert Vipers will be launched to shut the attack down before reinforcements may arrive. One thing's for sure, even an individual raider should be treated as a serious threat, and one that should be avoided or eliminated as soon as humanly possible.
That's mine! That was mine!
What makes these engagements even more serious is the loss of life and experience that comes with each and every lost pilot. Without the possibility of being reinforced by trained military officers, any replacement pilots must be sourced from the population of the civilian fleet, with their training virtually starting from scratch under the command of an experienced pilot. The first issue with recruiting civilians is, well, they're civilians, and with that comes a certain apathy to command structures. Without military training, discipline is at best wishful thinking, and on the Galactica, that just isn't gonna work.
Attention on deck. That means get on your feet, Nuggets.
With training simulators a long-lost relic of the Galactica's more noble past, any trainee must be quite literally hands-on, with experience only coming from actual flight time and combat drills using either manual lock-ons or through live fire exercises on any unlucky rock that happens to be floating past.
Winged it! Come on, people, I know this is just a drill, but let's look sharp out there.
When pilots are first confronted with active enemy targets, the difference between a nugget and an active pilot might be a single flick of the wrist. But with a great trainer, the void is the limit for any incoming pilots. The interesting quirk with this is that to be an active pilot is to be a commissioned officer. A junior officer maybe, but one that's still technically responsible for the enlisted crew beneath them. The unfortunate truth is that this can leave seasoned and experienced servicemen and women of the colonial fleet before the fall technically outranked by any Tom, Dick and Daggett that swaggers onto the flight deck. This is something that can rear its ugly head should anyone with an otherwise required role attempt to be promoted beyond their station.
Pollux! Redford, grab your crap before I chuck it in the cycler.
Fold my undies the way I like. Back off. Oh, nice mouth. Think they let officers talk like that? Gonna have to change your ways when you get them wings.
Not getting wings. They rejected my application for flight training.
Thought you aced the written exam. Interview went well?
Yeah, well, it turns out I'm in a critical position and my leaving would cause severe mission degradation.
That sucks. Critical position, my ass. They just don't want knuckle draggers sneaking up the pilot ready room.
This, in fact, highlights a serious issue found elsewhere on the Galactica and indeed the civilian fleet, with everyone expected to just keep on working in their roles without option to be promoted or move into another area of work. Each and every human survivor may well find themselves stuck there for the remainder of their life, and indeed, maybe even their children's lives too.
Over the past 2 years, the parents have been teaching the children how to operate the machinery. They have been passing along their skills. It is perfectly normal. It is not ideal, I know that. But there is nothing ideal about this fleet.
Do you see what's happening? Jobs are starting to be inherited, Madam President. We don't know how long we're going to be on these ships. What if it's 10 years? So I trained my son to be a deckhand because that's what I am, and that's all he can ever be. Is that the future we want?
In this painful humdrum of working to the grave, it's no secret that after several months of survival, morale on the Galactica was on a sliding scale from 0 to mutiny for many of the crew. Yes, there may have been a mystical quest out there for a new home, but day to day that's not going to mean much. What the crew needed was a win. Now, while I'm trying to avoid specifics, this highlights something that is unspoken, but always present for the crew of the Galactica. When there is something to do, some project to pick apart, that sense of purpose can inspire in even the most darkest of times. Case in point, with every combat situation with the Cylon forces, even a victory may wind up with broken down equipment and written off planes. While even a totally wiped out Viper can be broken down for scrap to repair others in the squadron, that ultimately still leaves the fleet down one bird. What if an engineer would take something from here, another thing from there? Maybe, just maybe, you might be able to mobilise a brand new vehicle. Enter the Blackbird. I'm not saying this is the greatest invention of all time, but the Blackbird represents something greater, that even with the toughest of conditions, the Galactica crew can find a way out. Hell, with the right word said to the right person, maybe even some of the work conditions can improve too. Stranger things have happened.
Chief, one of my nuggets failed to show up for basic flight instruction this morning.
Sorry to hear that, Captain.
So maybe you can tell me where the hell Diana Celix is.
Felix, front and center.
Flight instruction began 20 minutes ago, Celix. You want to be a pilot or not?
Yes, sir, but I thought that
you will think when I tell you to think, Nugget. And you might want to look at the plan of the day, because then maybe you'll know where you're supposed to be, and you might actually get there on time. And you're out of uniform to boot.
Oh, I'm sorry, Captain. I think I can handle that.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes. You have to be an officer to fly Vipers. You know that. Detail. And salute.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
To live and serve aboard a Battlestar is to work in defence of the 12 colonies beneath the banner of the colonial fleet. During periods of war, it is a vital job to ensure the safety and survival of humanity itself. But see, that's the thing. There isn't really a humanity to save anymore. What there is a ragtag fleet of survivors, clinging to survival aboard the freighters, shuttles, and industrial workhorses that made it through the genocide of the human race. While those on board the Galactica still strive to maintain a disciplined lifestyle, the fact is, there are certain adjustments that need to be made in light of this new society. It was the crew of the Battlestar Galactica that took on the responsibility of cataloguing the survivors in the days after the fall of the 12 colonies. Not only for a registry of the fleet itself, but in order to publicise the names of the survivors, in the hope of connecting families and friends who may otherwise have been split in the escape from the Cylons.
We can't transmit photos yet, so if you want you can leave them here with us, or you can put them on the board outside.
As the days passed, however, so too did the chance of the Survivors' Wall becoming anything more than a memorial to the lost. The whole section becoming something akin to a shrine, with candles lit day and night beneath the photographs, newspaper clippings, and dedications to the deceased. As survivors of the initial attack were themselves lost on the journey, memorials would be added, serving as the fleet's cenotaph for the remainder of the Galactica's service.
So where do you want to go when you bite the big one? I want to go right there next to Kat.
A water-walking viper jock.
Royal pain in the ass, but a hell of a stick to have on your wing.
You can put me right here. Next to Duck and Nora. Good card players. Nice way to spend eternity.
Okay, so whoever croaks first, the other one makes sure that the picture goes in the right place. Deal?
In the wake of all this tragedy and uncertainty, however, is the rise of the new civilian government. Housed in the recently renamed Colonial 1, surviving members of the colonial government have gathered what resources they have and formed a brand new quorum, made up of the representatives of the ships in the civilian fleet, under the leadership of an elected president. Well, mostly elected, sort of taken by privilege if I'm being honest, but rightly or wrongly, you can't say they don't get results.
Put him out the airlock. What?
Regardless, it doesn't take long before more outspoken members of the civilian fleet would call this out, demanding both reform and re-elections. How much of this is honest concern for the fleet, or power-hungry opportunists? Well, I guess the jury's out.
That I believe we need not only new leadership, but a whole new way of thinking.
Agree or disagree, the truth is that, in light of the desperate needs of the civilian fleet, the surviving government is instrumental in securing civilian support for the unwanted but necessary parts of survival, rationing supplies, establishing communication lines, and maintaining order by the carrot and not by the stick. This is an important distinction, as if it were not for the civilian government's calming influence, well, the colonial fleet doesn't teach diplomacy as a rule. Instead, in a parallel world, the civilian fleet wouldn't be as much a ragtag group of survivors under the protection of a Battlestar as a big floating set of spare parts, ripe for the taking.
Listen, all of you! We have orders to transfer the crewmen and the equipment on that list to Pegasus. We have no wish to harm anyone, but we will use force if necessary.
This is important to note for the Battlestar Galactica, because were this not the case, the Battlestar is extremely unlikely to be home to any civilian. Enter Camp Oil Slick, later to be known as Dogsville. Built within the unused starboard hangar deck, Dogsville started life as a temporary housing facility, before ending up as a permanent residence for an increasingly large population, dehoused or scattered by the continuing losses and deterioration of the civilian fleet, through enemy action, attrition, or just plain old bad luck. With civilians living in close proximity to one another, from different ships and different cultures, disease can be rife. Any civilian board in the Battlestar must first be entered into a health screening, performed by the rare few medical professionals still alive within the fleet. Now, within the colonial fleet, differences in culture and religion are often hidden beneath the uniform. Respected, yeah, but often put at rest when confronted with military duty and responsibility. Not so with the ordinary men and women of the 12 colonies. Indeed, many of the refugees housed in Dogsville hail from the fundamentalist world of Sagittarium. Here, modern medicine is treated as a sin, with herbal remedies preferred over the miracles of contemporary science. Not only does this lead to the potential of disease spreading amongst the civilian populace, but also threatens the security of the Battlestar's own military forces. Beyond this, division within Dogsville leads to fear, and with fear, absolute bloody-mindedness. With Galactica's forces spread thin, policing Dogsville is itself a dangerous task. With racial and cultural tensions running high, it doesn't take much to cause a riot. One thing that Dogsville does shine a light on, however, is the vast gulfs in religious worship that is followed within the civilian fleet. During normal fleet operations, religious worship is tolerated, but is often held in private, so as not to interfere with the military duty of any crewman on board. The most any typical crew member on board an active Battlestar is occasionally the odd prayer and a blessing from a hidden statue. Not so for the civilian refugees, who will often gather for prayer and worship in their hastily built shrines and temples, or else visit oracles in their private tents for personal blessings and readings for their future. Now, in colonial culture, there has always been a trace element of monotheism, with followers celebrating their one true god in secrecy, with their faith considered at best suspicious and at worst downright illegal. And yet it survived. It even managed to survive the apocalyptic events of the fall of the 12 colonies, with monotheist belief bubbling beneath the surface of the human survivors. Over time, the followers of this new religion built in number and confidence, threatening a revolution, especially with the poor and destitute, a large number of which found themselves in Dogsville, just waiting to be converted.
Listen to me! Listen to me! I'm coming back here, and if it is the last thing I do, I will ensure that every single one of you are fed, and your children are fed, as God is my witness!
Feeding and watering a fully manned Battlestar may have its difficulties, but throw in a ragtag group of civilian ships making up a fleet complement closer to 50,000, and you're in some serious trouble.
I've calculated that the rate of consumption regarding basic foodstuffs for the civilian population, this is based on information available to me at the time. The current civilian population of 45,265 will require, at minimum, 82 tons of grain, 85 tons of meat, 119 tons of fruit, 304 tons of vegetables, and 2.5 million JPs of water.
Is that per month?
Per week.
We've covered the water supply situation on a Jupiter Class Battlestar elsewhere, but to reiterate, the colonial fleet has been operating in deep space for many generations at this point, and have naturally made certain advancements in water filtration and recycling that by the time of the Jupiter Class Battlestar's introduction into the fleet, water is almost entirely recycled back into its tanks. Where this falls down, however, is the ships of the civilian fleet that are not exactly in the same boat. As such, one of the Battlestar's new responsibilities is to ensure the trade-off of waste and clean water with other ships on the fleet, to ensure a fresh supply is circulated at all times, with the aim to provide the minimum healthy amount of roughly 8 pints, or 4 litres of water for each human on the fleet.
Galactica's water recycling system is close to 100% effective. For all intents and purposes, there's not one drop of water that's wasted aboard. We have enough water for several years before replenishing.
I see.
Many of the ships, like the Vergon Express, were not made for long-term voyages. They'll have to tank off of us periodically.
Right.
Where this isn't possible, you can expect some extremely strict rations to be implemented.
We don't find new supplies, they'll run out of water in 2 days.
1/3, that's 16,000 people.
Get the names of those ships, tell the captains to go on emergency rations immediately.
There's gonna be riots on those ships. Civilians don't like hearing they can't take a bath or wash their clothes or drink more than a thimble a day.
Thank you for the warning, Colonel.
Thankfully, the civilian fleet's being made up of interstellar freighters capable of faster-than-light travel has one major thing going for it. The majority of these freighters were shipping food and raw materials between the colonies, and as such can provide an impressive array of foodstuffs. The Kimberhütte, for example, carried a range of frozen food that could be successfully rationed and distributed throughout the fleet, particularly to those vessels that were never really equipped for anything more than a short distance flight. More luxury goods such as high-end alcohol and tobacco is understandably in short supply. Unfortunately for many survivors on the civilian fleet, this provides an opportunity for the more unscrupulous to profit from others' lack of foresight. I'm talking, of course, about a black market. Maintaining a grip on the supply chains, seeing certain items disappear while others appear is an enterprise almost as old as the oldest profession. And you can be sure that this is also one of the goods on offer. More on that later. With colonial money no longer a useful measure of value, this has created a barter system that in many ways is a viable method of trade, so long as the thugs doing the deals aren't taking more than their fair share. I mean, trading a couple of belongings for a bottle of the good stuff makes some amount of sense, but things do start to feel a bit awkward when it comes to medicine or vital supplies required for the continued survival of the human race.
Last week, one of my aides came down with pneumonia. Billy had to trade liquor to get the antibiotics.
It's the nature of the beast. People want what they want.
The inconvenient truth, however, is that the longer the civilian fleet continues, the thinner the resources will get.
I hear they're still eating paper. Is that true? No. Paper shortage.
Rationing is important, but can only go so far when you're licking up crumbs from your bunkmate's pocket. What's more, the tension that can be caused by mistrust in others' food rations can be incredibly dangerous for morale.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I don't have anything
to share.
I told you, Starbuck, I don't have anything. Get off my back.
Yeah, I saw a protein bar in your cot.
I gave it to Coddle.
Right after I gave him head.
Oh, so what, now I'm a liar?
Oh, I don't know if the shoe fits.
All right,
maybe.
can it! Cat, get down here.
All right, for frack's sake, everybody eat. We're getting paranoid of this hunger.
Gods help you if there was some sort of contamination in the food supplies or a sudden ejection of the fleet's water supply, because there's not much chance of finding a Costco in deep space.
Most planets are just hunks of rock or balls of gas. The galaxy is a pretty barren and desolate place when you get right down to it.
Not much chance, but still a chance. Yes, somewhere out there in the dark reaches of the universe, there is the potential for naturally occurring water, perhaps in the form of ice, and potentially even some life. And sometimes that life might be edible. I'm talking, of course, about algae. Yum, yum, yum.
It's tough to choke down, but it's almost pure protein.
Much like our own spirulina, this algae is an excellent source of raw protein, which can be processed and reconstituted into a range of edible delights. From algae mash to algae crackers, and all the way to algae protein bars. Mmm.
It's fresh. You want a cup? Ever since they started grinding it out of algae, I've lost the taste.
Look, it isn't perfect, but when the very survival of the human race depends on it, you better believe this is the best you're gonna get. Then again, there's always booze.
You will wind up wearing tattered shoes if you mess with Mr. Booze. Don't mess with Mr. Booze. Don't mess with Mr. Booze. Don't mess with D-double-O-Z. If you've been so stiff they thought you'd die.
A Jupiter Class Battlestar was not built as a pleasure cruise, with practical design taking pride of place over such nuances as comfort and luxury. As discussed elsewhere, this normally isn't an issue. Even the greenest of colonial crew can put up with a shared bunk and a cold shower when they know hot, steamy shore leave is on the horizon. But without the hope of shore leave, or even any form of relief in the wake of the destruction of the 12 colonies, crew were forced to find entertainment where they can. can. The first thing naturally is to the pilot's rec room, where high-stakes games of Triad were already ingrained into the social life of any pilot or passing officer who just so fancies themselves a winner.
Take your mind off those 14-hour patrols.
Mind if I sit in, Lieutenant?
You've got the qubits, we've got the chair. Of course, if you've got anything to drink, we'll take that in lieu of cash.
Do you know I don't have any money? But, this jacket must be worth at least 15 cubits. It's made of the finest Capricorn cloth. Warm in winter, cooling in summer would look great on you. Anybody else got any civilian clothes they'd be interested in putting on the table? Don't let me keep you.
Now, Triad is a popular game, and cash, rations and clothing are all more than acceptable bids. The trouble is, when you're stuck in deep space, the novelty can wear off fast.
You're folding with 3 up, are you crazy?
Not when you got me beat. Prince High Red, right? I'm playing with these cards for so long I know every fold.
It's no wonder then that during any downtime they may face, crew often turn their attention to the civilian fleet. Here, Galactica crew may find a range of different environments. Most are unpleasant at best, but some may offer some form of relief. Take the luxury liner Cloud9, an FTL-capable civilian ship that includes a huge pressurized dome with atmospheric simulators to recreate lush, open spaces with gardens, trees, buildings, and some of the sweetest air to be found in the civilian fleet. Naturally, it's often the first choice for many who fancy a bit of time away from their work.
Didn't know you were coming down here.
I grabbed a 2-day rotation. I thought I'd grab some R&R.
With its range of luxury bars and diners, Cloud9 is also the home of more illicit activities. As mentioned in the last segment, underground black market activities are alive and well throughout the civilian fleet. But rather than just peddling luxury goods such as high-brand alcohol, black marketeers are more than willing to also peddle the flesh. Sex work was both a legal and commonplace activity in the 12 colonies themselves, so it stands to reason that it would continue into the surviving fleet.
I'm gonna have to ask for an extra 100 since you spent the night.
Where this becomes an issue is when it no longer becomes a choice. Black marketeers and gang leaders hold the cards in the post-apocalyptic community, and may force the hand of the more needy and desperate. Suffice to say, the problems continue when you can no longer foot the bill. But not all romance has to be so sordid. As part of the new normal, humans across the fleet are encouraged to engage in romantic relationships, with even parts of the Galactica sectioned off for date nights and taking advantage of the best views on the ship. This is more than just recreation, of course. It's necessary for the very survival of the human race.
I'm just remembering what you said right after the Cylon attack. That if we really want to save the human race, we better start having babies.
Hey, what you trying to say to me?
As part of this new arrangement, crew on the Galactica looking to start a family are offered more spacious accommodation, shrugging off the communal bunk rooms for areas more devoted to raising children and sharing space as a couple. Of course, with longer relationships come their own complications. Not every marriage is a happy one after all.
It's a marriage. Why we build bars?
Yes, drinking in a rec room is one thing, but sometimes you just need somewhere where everybody knows your name. And Joe's Bar is just that. Built behind a storage area of the largely unused starboard flight pod, Joe's Bar is run by civilians, notably Joe being one of them, and serves a range of alcohol, while delivering on some good old-fashioned games such as pyramids, with a salvaged piano even gracing the ears of its patrons. Now, something to bear in mind is that while the crew of the Galactica may put on the bravest of faces, both they and the survivors of the civilian fleet, they've gone through hell. They are traumatized, tired, angry, and for the most part, just quite sad. As such, while the fun of Joe's Bar works for most, it can become a crutch, and a brutal one at that. Sometimes, you just need to let it all out. Boxing has long been a tradition amongst those in the colonial military, and when the time is right, set setting up a boxing ring and letting people take shots at their superiors, well, it doesn't sound very healthy, but who am I to judge? It seems to do the job, and sometimes, just sometimes, it can let the truth win out.
I missed you. I missed you. I missed you.
The Battlestar Galactica, and by extension the Jupiter Class Battlestars as a whole, were icons of colonial ingenuity. Heavily armed, incredibly dangerous, and holding a fleet of attack craft that can control huge amounts of space. Even with its armour stripped, the Galactica was an aging beast with plenty of bite. Living and serving aboard the bucket was to commit to a life of constant struggle. The Cylon attack was devastating, and yet despite the sleep deprivation, the paranoia, and the endless struggle that followed, not a single crewman turned their back on the cause. To protect what was left of the human race and to fight back wherever they could. Outnumbered and outmatched, every victory was one worth celebrating, and every shot counted.
Mission accomplished.
Relationships amongst the crew were actively encouraged, but while some found true, lasting love, others found themselves stuck with the nearest person next to them. No one on board the Galactica was truly a saint. Many were broken, others just completely out of their mind. But one thing's for sure, as long as they put their uniform on and did their duty, they were good enough for now. The same can be said of the Galactica herself, because whether it was fate or just plain luck, her imperfections won out in the end. With one final jump, she closed one chapter of history and began another.
She's broke her back. She'll never jump again.
Wherever we are is where we're gonna stay.
And in the end, Galactica was laid to rest not as a ship, but as a hero. She burned out in the service of something greater than herself, the survival of her people and the dream of a future. The stars may forget her name, but humanity never will. For as long as we endure, so too will the memory of the ship that carried us home.
She was a grand old lady.
The grandest. To Galactica. Best ship in the fleet.
To Galactica.
Oh god, absolutely devastating. Well, there you go. Part 2 of the life aboard the Battlestar Galactica. Honestly, this video could have been twice the length. A massive thank you to those of you who've already signed up to Patreon. If you want to do your part, why don't you check out the links below and let me know what ships you want to see. Until then, see ya!